Welcome back to Born to be a Sports Agent. Today's guest brings a wealth of experience and a unique perspective on the ever-changing landscape of college athletics. Tim Collins, athletic director at Eastern Washington, joins me to talk about how the world of college sports has shifted over the course of his career. So, Tim, first of all, it's great to see you.
Good
I
to see you,
met Tim
Jill.
when he was at Fresno State, and here we are. Now he's the AD at Eastern Washington. So, my first question to you is, since you began your career in college athletics, which I don't, where did you first start, Tim? Where was your first place where you were?
Well, I like to count my time as a ball boy for UCLA in the early 90s. I wasn't on the official payroll or anything, but I say that's my first job. And if you include that, I've been at every level of college athletics except for Division III in junior college. But I've been at NAIA, I've been at Division II,
Oh, wow.
all that. But really, where I got my start was as a student assistant and video coordinator at Loyola Marymount for men's basketball when I was in college. And so that's when I got, my career started. It was through the coaching path, and in the early 2000s, it was still that, maybe romanticized idea of college athletics and what we were trying to accomplish. But that's where it all started.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. I didn't really know that. Um, so since you began, what major shifts have you seen in the role of student athletes, especially with NIL and the transfer portal changing at least the game? Maybe it's changed all the sports. I don't know. But
Well, it's amazing to think about some of the voices in athletics and specifically student athletes. If you go far as back as civil rights politics and some of how their voice was being used and how controversial it was then, or even go towards some of the things in the last couple of decades of student athletes kneeling for the anthem. I mean, there were these grand gestures that maybe their voice was inserted, but now there's been a real shift in the last decade to include the student athlete voice in more governance. And as that's, maybe empowered through pockets of NCAA legislation, now you look, it's now in the economics of it as well. It's not just in a legislative scope. It's now actually in this market, in this economy of college athletics, and the demand is real, right? In terms of
yeah.
how their presence has been felt, because there's real capitalistic principles now in play, right? And I kind of always say, Jill, everybody loves capitalism until it doesn't benefit them, and that's kind of what we've seen is it's an open market. It's been this open market now, that's been a real challenge to stabilize.
Well, how many kids right now of like how many like at Eastern Washington, and maybe you haven't kept track of this, how many kids have gone in the portal and how many of them haven't gotten opportunities? See, this is the part we're not
Yeah.
talking about. And what's happening with the graduation rates and what happens when they transfer? I mean, our daughter transferred once and she had to go a whole extra year of college and she was a great student.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's where we've lost focus a little bit is on the real outcomes that we all set out to provide through opportunities in intercollegiate athletics academically. And the portal, let me say this, the transferring has always existed.
Right,
And for a lot of sports, especially, they didn't have to sit out. But
right.
once this label, this thing of the portal became this thing, right? It had a brand. I think it exacerbated really some desires to portal, or it became more of a newsworthy topic. And what I mean by that is, for let's say for a football program like ours, 110 student athletes, we would have roster turnover every year, right?
Right.
We were probably, we look back, one of the first schools. We lost our quarterback Vernon Adams, who transferred to Oregon. Now he had to sit out, or he might have been a grad transfer that year. That was before my time, but that was a big thing, and that was before the portal. And so maybe the big dogs have always plucked some student athletes from places like Eastern. That's always happened, but now that we've made it more accessible, and it's definitely happening more often. I think what we're not talking about as well is the portal's a little bit of a two-way street, in that a lot of times student athletes will see that their opportunity is not going to be at a certain school, and they want to go into go to a place and transfer down,
Yeah.
and or maybe sometimes student athletes um, aren't welcome back for whatever reason, and now they're being put in the portal, and they're announcing that they're in the portal, and so that will be captured in this number of, XYZ football team has 18 players in the portal. Well, maybe the coaches only wanted to lose through, or they didn't want to lose three or four of them. And so all that gets blended in and quantified, but they're really separate issues. Now, one thing I really appreciate what you asked about, Jill, was the academic outcome and what happens with transferring.
Yeah.
And at places like Eastern, or even at Fresno State, there's only a limited amount of credits that institutions are willing to take towards towards degrees. And different schools have different, typically it's around, 50% or 60%, depending on the major. Typically all the generals will transfer, but then when you start getting into those upper division classes, that's when universities, to get a degree from their place, want a majority of those credits from their institution, which makes complete sense. So what I've seen, probably the thing that I have a huge challenge with, is when we take a transfer in, especially later in their junior or senior year, if they haven't graduated yet, that restricts what degree programs they can transfer into. And I don't like that. If a student athlete wants to get a business degree, you know, now they're taking a risk by transferring to some place. And if all their business credits don't transfer, for them to be eligible, they may have to be interdisciplinary studies or general studies or something like that. And I think that does a disservice to the student athlete. And so people forget the reason why we had a sit out year
Mhm.
wasn't to be punitive to the student athlete. It was actually to get them a chance to catch up and recover academically. That was the whole reason, to make sure
Oh,
that they were academically solvent. That was the foundation of it. And sure, it discouraged student athletes from transferring, because then they had to sit out and not play a year. But it was
right.
because of academic solvency. And so now we've lost we've lost in litigation, and so we've kind of lost that guiding principle for us. It's the same thing when they talk about unlimited eligibility, how that's being challenged as a legal statute. I tweeted recently. I kind of picked my spots on social media, but I said it's kind of like we forget why we had 4 years to begin with. You know, it's because that's about how long it should take to get on somebody on path towards a degree.
Oh, well, that's really fascinating. I didn't think, well, so how many, okay, like at Eastern Washington, in most of your, majors, what
Mhm.
is the average? It's really like 60% they take of the transfer credits?
Yeah, and so that's one of the unique things when it comes to the generals. The general credits, typically a lot of those will transfer, but then it'll be a cap on how many credits will transfer in. And so, we're at a quarter school, so that also, the math starts working out in different ways. Typically, for a place like ours, it's way more advantageous for a student athlete to come in as a graduate, because then we can enroll them into graduate school and it's seamless. We have a greater challenge, especially with the COVID year, people taking extra years. If they've been in school, because the NCAA now, after 3 years, you have to be 80% towards your degree completed to be eligible. That was the new rule that keeps everybody from being in the underwater basket weaving classes the whole time, right? You had to be making progress towards your degree. And so for places like ours, half your credits for upper division and all that have to be from Eastern for you to graduate, which if you're only going to be there 1 year, it's hard to get all of those. So then what ends up happening is we have student athletes complete and then, needing an additional year. Who funds that? For men's basketball, women's basketball, and football, it's NCAA legislation that we have to fund that. And at places that are resource limited like ours, that becomes a challenge.
Wow. Wait, but what about the 80% eligibility? How many of these kids aren't eligible then?
Well, we can't take them if they're not eligible. It like that's where if somebody comes in, and I heard this story, this is a great example that illustrates it. There was a mid-major women's basketball player from the Midwest who was all league player of the year in their league, and she was an engineer, and she wanted to transfer for her last year to Purdue. Okay, it was my understanding, and great engineering school, all these things. Well, when she goes to do all the transfer paperwork, she goes in the portal. Great. They say, well, you can't come here and graduate in engineering because you don't have, we won't take enough of your engineering credits. You can graduate in communications or business or general studies, whatever it was. I don't maybe know the exact major. Well, by that time, when she goes, well, now maybe I'll just transfer back. Well, her scholarship had already been given away by her previous school. And so
Right.
those are the things that some of the stories that people don't talk about. You know, our industry, rightfully so, 20 years ago was challenged for the academic outcomes. You know, how legitimate, how authentic were the academic outcomes that were being achieved. Student athletes spoke up. If you remember the North Carolina case from a couple of years ago, probably 20 years ago now, they spoke up and said, "Hey, we wanted to get meaningful degrees."
Right.
Totally on board with it, right? And so that's why we have these progress towards degree requirements and the academic outcomes are being studied. Well, now I feel like they're being watered down because of the portal. But it's hard to regulate freedom of movement. Everybody, a coach can leave, an AD can leave,
They can leave.
a
Yeah,
regular student can leave
I
can
know.
transfer on campus. It happens all the time. So it's hard to regulate the movement, but we still need to stay focused on what our outcomes are.
Yeah, I mean, I've always said you can't restrict people's right to work. I couldn't figure out how we were doing it in the NCAA. We aren't anymore, but it's an
Right.
interesting, legal problem. So, so my second question is, how has your job as an athletics director changed even, and I realize you haven't always been an AD in the last decade, okay, since you started in athletics to now, what new responsibilities or pressures are you navigating that you didn't exist when you started?
Well, it's funny. When I first got into coaching, college basketball coaching, I wanted to be an AD, and I was kind of thinking, back to the days of when they just hired the old ball coach to be the athletic director, right? And pretty early on, I saw that I needed to strengthen an administrative lane, and that's where I got into fundraising and development. I'll tell you, it's changed in the last 23 months since I was hired at Eastern, let alone the last 10 years. I, the drive or the pressures for revenue generation, those have always been there, right?
Okay.
I think um, that's always been in existence, whether it be fundraising or sponsorships or just gosh, even at some stadiums developing pouring rights or all these ancillary revenues. That's always been there. I think one thing that is a greater challenge now is what our legal exposure is, right? And that's created uncertainty. Joe, like I've even heard as an athletic director that if the House settlement is passed, this 22 million or 21 million dollar rev share
Mhm.
that some schools are going to pay out 80/20 based on football and men's basketball at 80%
Mhm.
because that's where the revenue is being generated in their mind. And then some schools are going to be paying out based on gender equity. Now I've heard both sides are going to be sued, right? And so
Well,
as
uh,
an athletic director, you're kind of going, well, what's the path of least resistance, so to speak?
well, the thing is, the case, okay, the settlement is 75% goes to football,
Mhm.
25%. So if you follow that and follow the federal guidelines, you at least have backup from the settlement, which is a
Mhm.
10-year injunction. So I'm giving you some legal advice. So that's one way. But as far as Title IX, I think right now they're having a hard time keeping track of Title IX, Tim, because if kids are coming in and out of let's say you have a women's, I don't, do you have women's softball at Eastern?
We do not. So that's a perfect one to use because we don't have it.
Okay, but let's say you have women's softball and there's a two people from women's softball that are going in the portal and 10 football players going in the portal. Okay. Or or let's say you have two women's softball five men's baseball, let's say hypothetically. Okay, so are you out of balance? And then what happens when they add people in? And how are you keeping track? Because all those sports, I don't know what the portal wins for everybody is. I know what the portal windows are for football, because why? My husband's a football coach and we talk about it, right? And I have a lot of coaches that I represent. So, I'm like, okay, well, it's the portal, whatever. I'm hoping we don't lose anybody, whatever it is. But how are you keeping track of that?
Yeah, so from a roster management side, those numbers are tracked. I want to say it's either first day of participation or first day of school. So there is a number that comes in from that. Now, that's from more of a Title IX reporting from roster management and participation numbers. Where one impact though that you're talking about, Jill, that you bring up a really good point is if you have five roster spots open up, it's going to cost a lot more in recruiting, with visits, identification, bringing in families, all those. Whereas if you only have two come in, it won't cost, shouldn't cost you as much, if all things are equal. And that's probably where just some of the evaluation of costs are hard to match up because a roster that only loses two, that only has to replace two student athletes, they're not going to spend as much as somebody that has to replace five. And so that's where probably I would say you would have to be making sure you're notating in your reporting for your equity in your department.
Mhm.
Hey, the reason why this sport spent more in recruiting was they had additional roster spots to fill in a given year. And that would just be anecdotal. So the reporting may look off, but by noting that, you would be covered.
Okay. All right. So back to the case, though, it's either 75%,
Right.
25%, or it's 22% of the revenue.
Mhm.
Okay. So if a sport is not bringing in any revenue, I think you can justify, I hate to say it, but if they're not bringing in revenue, there's no revenue to share. But what they're not
It,
talking about is the losses, how much it costs to run a department. That's what they're not talking about.
and that's what's fascinating. That's what's fascinating about this economy that we've created, because it actually wouldn't work so much in the private sector, right? It's
No.
and that's and there is value beyond there's value beyond financial value
Mhm,
by having college athletics. And I firmly believe that.
mhm.
Um, I believe in what we do for our university on a Saturday, for example, and bringing people to campus and celebrating with our alumni. I believe in that. I believe in the brand that we've created in our region and how athletics helps tell that story. We've always said as an industry, we're the front porch. I really believe in that. And so now we're having to react to even more financial external pressure from the NIL or pay to play, however you want to put it, that's happening in our industry. But when you look at it, even not just at the FCS level, there's places at the Group of Five level or even Power Five level that can't stand alone economically with these latest forces, with the $22 million.
I
And
don't
that's
think
where you're
most people
seeing.
can. Do you think? I don't think most schools, based on the ADs I've talked to, Tim, I'm telling you, even the bigger schools are saying we can't afford this model.
Well, and that's where you're seeing recently several Autonomy 4 athletic directors publicly make comments. I don't want to say lobbying's not the right word, but imploring and talking about increased institutional support, increased state support to help balance this. That's always been a part of the model at the FCS level. It's always been a part of the model at all Group of Fives. There's not one Group of Five school that's on completely self-support. Now it's becoming even a greater topic, which is uh, to ask your students on campus to foot that bill, or to at an even greater level. If they see the value, then um, once again, it's an open market.
Okay, so my last question to you is at Eastern Washington, how do you balance staying true to your program's identity and values while adapting to the new national trends that are reshaping Division One athletics?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I appreciate the opportunity to get back to that because In July of 2023, when I started as the athletic director, we started shaping our department, and we have three buckets of service. We serve our student athletes, we serve our campus, and we serve our community. And
Mm,
I have always felt that if we waver outside of those three areas, we start to lose our way. And that's kind of consistent. You could say that as our industry a little bit. Now, we have a fourth bucket, okay, and that's driving revenue. All right, because we had to create more financial value in our own department to stabilize our department. So we kind of say now we have four buckets. We serve our student athletes, we serve our campus, we serve our community, and a lot of times those things are intertwined, right? And then
right.
the fourth is we have to drive revenue. I'll tell you one thing that I've had success in telling our story. A lot of people challenged NIL. Um, why did student athletes need NIL? And there's two things I've pointed to. One, if you had a music student on campus and they had a scholarship and they signed a record deal, they wouldn't lose their music scholarship.
Right.
And a student athlete couldn't sign a record deal or they would lose their athletic scholarship. That didn't make any sense. So you needed to deregulate that. So I think people can get on board with that. Now, a lot of the times some of our donors push back and they say, yeah, these student athletes are leaving for 25 or $50,000. That's not life-changing money. And I stop them and I use my own story, which I've been very fortunate along the way, that yes, it may not, to a donor, 25 or $50,000 may not be transformational in lifetime generational wealth. Yeah,
Mhm.
that would be true. But I always use the example that I had $25,000 saved that my mom had helped me save along the way for college. Okay. And I got a full scholarship to Loyola Marymount University and something I'm thankful for every day. But
Mhm.
that $25,000 became my first down payment on a home. Okay, because I didn't end up needing it because I was on scholarship. It became my first down payment on a home in 2008 in Lewiston, Idaho, and then that became my next down payment on a home in Laramie, Wyoming, which became my family and I. That was our nest egg for our down payment on our home in Fresno, right? So all those
Yeah.
things. So when I say, yeah, is it generational wealth? Am I able to retire? No, but that set our family up for success. And so I do push back that 25, $50,000 is meaningful to people. So all those forces kind of at work. The thing that we're trying to do, we're trying to put our student athletes in the position through financial literacy, through programs like that
Mhm.
where they understand the other areas too that are being invested into them at our level, whether that be through scholarship, nutrition, mental health resources, all those things that we're trying to pour in as much as we can financially, but then also, time and talent as well. Hopefully they feel that, and as they're supported at Eastern. Then the last thing, our fans, and we're at this interesting level of Division One, at the FCS level,
Mhm.
because football, we have our own identity. We're not worried about the college football playoff. And we enjoy the opportunity once a year to play a Power Five or a Group of Five. 2 years ago, one of my first games as athletic director, we played at Fresno State at Bulldog Stadium, and
Yeah.
we lost a tough one in overtime. I don't want to talk about it, but
Yeah, I know it
um,
was close. I wasn't at that game, but I heard about it.
yeah. But for football, we have our own identity, and so I'm okay with that. The threat of the top 40 schools going and doing their own thing for football. I'm not. That doesn't keep me up at night. What
Hmm.
keeps me up is actually the access to championships in general. So looking at men's basketball, the automatic qualifier that a Big Sky school gets, that has value to us because
Right.
the Cinderella story or the opportunity to play in March Madness, that has value. We just two of our track athletes just came back from NCAA regionals, one in the hurdles and then another. She was a long jumper and triple jumper. having access to NCAA championships in the sports that we sponsor, even though it may be just one spot for our league,
Mhm.
for team competitions, that's what I get more worried about. And I do believe that if the top 40 or 50 go do their own thing in football, I think there will be value to that. But I don't know that the you think about those basketball institutions, the Villanovas or the Gonzagas, that's the other team in Spokane County, as I say. Those properties matter from a national landscape in other sports. Look what
Right.
happened in college baseball this weekend with how many mid majors are making super regionals and hopefully on to Omaha. That's a part of the romantic feeling that I referenced at the beginning of our call. That's that romantic feeling that has helped build fandom for our sport. You know, the stories of student athletes growing from freshman year, sophomore year, junior, and fans attaching themselves to that story. That's part of why we all fell in love with college athletics.
Yeah.
And we're taking this risk that the more we diminish that, okay, the more we diminish that, whether that be removing access to championships for the little guy, whether that be fans not getting to know the student athlete's story as much because they're only there for 1 year, the more we diminish that, the more we put at risk of this great thing that we love.
Yeah, I am worried about that too. I'm worried about that for everybody, unless you're like in the Big Ten or the SEC, and
Right.
everybody else is. Are they going to matter, or is every player athlete that's, you know, let's say you develop a player and they become great and they all transfer. Like, will at Fresno State, will we ever have a Derek Carr and or a
Mhm.
David, or even, what's his name? Our great quarterback that we in 2022, we win the whole thing because of him, Jake Hayner.
Yeah. But he was a transfer in, remember?
He was
And
a
that's,
transfer, but it was,
yeah.
but he wasn't. Okay, remember, okay, this is, I don't, we maybe can delete this, but remember when we were sitting in that meeting with Chris Pacheco and they were going to start the collective? The collectives didn't exist quite yet. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The other thing I have a problem with is, hey, NIL's fine. It's the collectives that are really created this. Uh, I don't want to say unfair advantage, but it's not monitored. It's not regulated.
Yeah, it's put the
It,
market out of balance for sure. And it's not probably a true economic principle of why people, because it's not an investment that people can get back.
no, there's no
Um,
ROI. No,
right. Yeah.
I don't even know what to. So let me ask you this. This is a hard question. Are you opting in if she confirms the settlement at Eastern Washington? What are
Yeah, so no, that's a great that's a good question. And right now is June 4th of 2025 at 9:34 a.m. We are not planning to opt in
okay?
for this next year. And then I think that really buys us time. At our level, one of the things that a lot of FCS schools or a lot of schools in general were looking at were the proposed roster limits. And now that the discussions, taking place about, well, maybe those roster spots will be grandfathered in or, all of that. Um, that was our initial read on the situation. We didn't want to have to eliminate roster spots, because those are real students on our campus.
Mhm.
Whether that be if they're walk-ons, they're full tuition paying students, all of those things. We didn't want to eliminate those opportunities. That was our initial read. Although the kind of grandfathering roster spots has still or has kind of come out
They
more
put voluntary, and I don't think she's going to go for that.
yeah. And so some of those things I still think for places like ours, I think it's more prudent to take a slightly a patient approach and
Uh-huh.
see how this plays out next year. There's a lot of things that are still out there. You know, what are the costs associated with opting in? What are the, there's a lot of uncertainties that, places like ours, we are obviously not self-supportive. And so revenue for us really needs to be supporting, that service to campus bucket, also needs to recognize the balance that we have in that.
Yeah, that makes sense then. Is that what most of the ADs are doing in the Big Sky, or do you guys just do you all discuss this or?
Oh yes, we had our Big Sky athletic director meetings last week, and this is a topic. I think most schools at our level are taking a wait and see approach. I think it's public record. I think it's been out there. There's like two or three that are opting in immediately, and then the remaining schools kind of have our eye on the future to see how this shakes out.
So can you opt in later on?
Yes. Yep. And I think that was one of the things that was unique about it because here's the autonomy four cannot. They are named in the
Awesome.
class or in
Yeah.
the suit. So
Mhm.
they have to opt in. It's everyone else. It's all the remaining membership that has the chance to opt in. And you can opt in at one point and then decide to opt out and vice versa. So that's our
Back
understanding.
pay to the athletes from 2000, before they NIL was part of the lawsuit is paying back the people who didn't get NIL.
So, and that's one of Jill, that's one of the frustrations of the FCS athletic directors is how the NCAA is executing that payment is by lowering revenue shares for this year and future years to its membership institutions.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so at a place like Eastern, we're losing, 180, $200,000 of revenue annually moving forward. And the reality is that money's going to pay um, uh, Power Five at the time, right?
Right.
Football and men's basketball players.
Of
And
course.
so the FCS athletic directors, a lot of us kind of go, well, hold on a second. Why are we paying this? We weren't sued, but it's all
If you
under
don't
the,
opt in, do you not have to pay that?
no, you still have to pay
You still have to pay.
because it's the NCAA and the Power Four or, Autonomy Four now, Power Five conferences that are all named in the suit.
So you're not opting in because of the revenue share and the roster spots.
We're not opting in because of the roster spots. Just
Okay.
because you opt in, you don't have to pay. You can pay up to, but you don't have to. You can pay
Right.
zero. There
Right.
there there
I
there
do
are probably
understand
going to
that.
be schools that pay zero.
Yeah, got it. Okay. Well, I so appreciate you being on
Yeah,
my
absolutely.
podcast, and it was great to talk to you. And since this interview, the House case actually did get confirmed, although part of it was appealed. So in the next podcast that I do, I will discuss in detail more about the settlement and kind of how it's being implemented at different universities. So thanks for listening. If you want to get on my email list, go to my website at jillmcbridebaxter.com and click on the button that says contact me and put in your email address and you'll be on my email list. You can also set a meeting with me if you're looking for representation or any kind of consultation on the house settlement. Thanks a lot and have a great day. Thanks for listening to Born to be a Sports Agent.